At 68, I never imagined I would spend my birthday sleeping on the dirty floor of an abandoned garage on the outskirts of Chicago, reeking of motor oil, with my son's cruel words still echoing in my head. "What would you ever do with a real inheritance? Dad knew you'd never make any use of it." That night, with tears blurring my eyes and my hands trembling, I turned the rusty key in the lock, unaware that door hid my husband's greatest secret. I never thought that at 68 I would sleep in a deserted garage, surrounded by the stench of oil and decades of dust. But there I was, shivering in the dark, clutching the mysterious key in my hand, tears clouding my vision, while my son's vicious words rang on. "You're just a useless old woman. What would you ever do with a real inheritance?" It all began 3 weeks after Richard's funeral, my husband of 42 years. In Attorney Miller's office downtown, I wore the same black dress from the service, while David, my son, looked sharp in a tailored suit. The lawyer seemed uneasy as he prepared to read the will. "To my son, David Harris, I leave the condominium in downtown Chicago and my primary investment portfolio." A chill ran down my spine, then almost passed over me. "To my beloved wife, Mary Harris, I leave the property at 1420 Industrial Avenue, the garage and everything inside." A garage. After 42 years of marriage, Richard left me a garage. I was too stunned to speak, too confused to even ask why. I felt David's hand grip my shoulder too tightly as he leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I didn't know what those words really meant. That very night, when I returned to the place I still thought of as home, the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, where Richard and I had lived for 15 years, David set my suitcase down at the door. "I think you should find somewhere else to stay, Mom. The penthouse is mine now. It's in the will." His voice was cold, calculating, like the practiced tone of business he had perfected over the years. "Tomorrow my colleagues are coming to discuss remodeling Dad's office. I need to start making changes. But where will I go?" My voice was barely a whisper. David shrugged, merciless. "You can stay with Aunt Ellen for a while, or you've always got that garage Dad left you." His laugh cut like a knife. "Why would Dad leave you that dump anyway? I don't get it. What are you going to do with it? Open an auto shop at your age?" Something inside me shattered. I tried to tell him I needed time, that I couldn't leave that very night. That's when he said the words that carved deep into my heart. "You're just a useless old woman. What would you ever do with a real inheritance? Dad knew you'd never make any use of it." The cruelty was so unexpected, so unlike the son I thought I had raised, that I couldn't respond. I just quietly picked up my suitcase, my purse, and the key Mr. Miller had handed me after the will reading, and left. I drove aimlessly through the city, tears blurring my sight. How had it come to this? How had I not seen what my son had become? The questions whirled in my mind as I turned down an unfamiliar industrial street and saw a shabby garage with a padlock on the door. My hand shook as I slid the key into the rusty lock. The door groaned open, and my flashlight cut through decades of darkness. I froze. Inside there wasn't junk or old tools as I had expected. Before me stood 3 cars covered with carefully draped sheets. What stopped my heart was what I recognized beneath the first cover, the unmistakable silver grille of a vintage Aston Martin. With trembling fingers, I pulled the cloth back to reveal a flawless 1964 DB5 in silver, identical to the one Sean Connery drove in the James Bond film Richard loved. The car gleamed like it had just left the factory, not like it had sat forgotten in this dark garage for years. "Richard," I whispered into the silence, "what did you do?" In all our 42 years of marriage, my husband had never mentioned collecting cars. No sign of a passion, an investment, or this secret life. The second was a 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, with its iconic doors and graceful lines, instantly recognizable even to my untrained eye. The third, a 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB4. Its blazing red paint reminded me of the wine Richard always ordered for our anniversary dinners. Each car had a leather portfolio with documents, ownership certificates, and maintenance records. Even without expertise, I knew these weren't just beautiful cars, they were museum-level treasures. I could hardly believe it. Then I saw an envelope taped to the wall, my name written in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Beside it was a light switch. When I flipped it, I realized this was no ordinary garage. The space was professionally equipped with climate control, specialized flooring, and security systems. Not an abandoned building at all, but a meticulously planned automotive sanctuary. I sank into a leather chair against the wall, holding the heavy envelope in my hands. My heart pounded as I opened it and read, "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found the final gift I prepared for you." Richard's first lines made my hands shake. I took a deep breath and continued. "First, I'm sorry for the shock and the confusion you're going through. This secret wasn't meant to hurt you, but to protect what I built for your future." A tear slid down my cheek. Richard had always cared for me, but I never imagined this. 6 years ago, when I was diagnosed, the doctors said I had at most 5 years. I stretched it another year, but I knew our time together was limited, and I had to make sure you would be secure once I was gone. I paused, struggling to hold back sobs. The diagnosis of advanced heart failure had been devastating, but Richard had always brushed it aside, saying we had plenty of time. I had never guessed he had been planning for goodbye all along. "I know you'll wonder about the will, why I left the house to David and not to you. Believe me, that decision cost me more sleepless nights than the illness itself. Over the past 10 years, I've watched our son change. The ambitious boy we raised became something else harsher, more calculating than I ever hoped. Honestly, I feared what might happen to you if I left everything to both of you or split it evenly. David would try to control the estate, manage your share for your benefit. That's how he would put it." Another tear blurred the ink. "I saw the way he spoke to you when he thought I wasn't listening, how he dismissed your opinions and your needs." I hadn't realized Richard had noticed. I had always excused David's disregard, telling myself he was just busy, just stressed with work, so I structured the inheritance this way. David received what he thought was valuable: the penthouse, the investments, the status symbols. But what you see before you now, my love, is the true wealth. Just these 3 cars are worth about $12 million. $12 million. I looked at the 3 machines, their polished surfaces reflecting the overhead lights. The documents verify their authenticity, and you'll find the contact information for Charles Woods, my trusted dealer and advisor on these acquisitions. He can guide you with any decisions." I read on, each word revealing more of Richard's careful planning. But the cars are only the beginning. In the safe behind our photo from New Orleans, the code is our anniversary date. There you'll find the deeds to several properties I purchased in the past 6 years, all placed in a trust that transfers to your name upon my passing. You'll also find details of bank accounts sufficient to let you live comfortably for the rest of your life. I staggered toward the framed photo on the wall. Richard and me smiling on Bourbon Street as a street musician played during our 35th anniversary trip. The safe opened softly when I entered our anniversary date. Inside was a thick folder and several labeled USB drives. The main document read, "Complete Asset Portfolio for Mary Harris." I opened it and had to sit down as the columns of numbers and property descriptions blurred before my eyes. Apartment buildings in Houston, a commercial property in Dallas, a small vineyard in Napa Valley, a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and investments. The total value at the bottom left me breathless. I turned back to the letter, my hands trembling. I know this is overwhelming, and I'm sorry I kept it secret. What began as a project to ease my own worries about the future grew so large I realized revealing it too soon could put you in danger if David discovered the scale of these holdings. Richard had known. He had predicted exactly what would happen, had seen in advance how David would react. I've always believed character shows most clearly in the moment of inheritance. David receives both a test and a legacy. And you, my love, receive the means to live the rest of your life as you choose, owing nothing to anyone. All my love, now and forever. Richard. I clutched the letter, tears streaming uncontrollably. After 42 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my husband. Instead, it seemed only now I was discovering the depth of his love and foresight. The irony struck deep. Just hours earlier, my son had cast me out of what I thought was home, calling me a useless old woman, while believing he had secured the real inheritance. He couldn't have been more wrong. I spent that first night on a leather sofa in the small adjoining room of the garage. The next morning, I realized just how thoroughly Richard had planned. The office had a tiny bathroom with a shower, a mini fridge stocked with water and basic food, even a closet with several outfits in my exact size, tags still attached. In daylight, the garage no longer looked abandoned but like a carefully renovated facility. The shabby exterior was a deliberate disguise, hiding the treasure within. After a simple breakfast, I dialed the number for Charles Woods that Richard had written in the letter. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Harris, I've been waiting for your call. First, my condolences on your loss. Richard was not only a client but a friend." 2 hours later, a distinguished man in his 60s arrived. Charles Woods looked exactly like his voice had suggested. Silver hair, neatly dressed in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. "Your husband began acquiring these cars about 6 years ago," he explained. He was meticulous. Each purchase was thoroughly vetted for authenticity, provenance, and investment potential. "But why cars?" I asked, still trying to reconcile this passion with the husband I thought I knew. Charles smiled gently. "He once told me cars are tangible assets. They're beautiful, and just looking at them brings joy. Unlike stocks or bonds, they can be appreciated in many ways as art, as feats of engineering, as pieces of history, and as investments." He wanted to leave you something you could see and touch, not just numbers on paper. My throat tightened hearing how Richard had thought of me. It was so like him, practical and tender at once. "The collection is worth around $12 million now, as he noted in the letter," Charles continued, "and its value is steadily increasing. These particular models are considered among the best investments in the collector's market." "So, what should I do with them?" I asked. "That's up to you, Mrs. Harris. You could sell them individually or as a collection, keep them as investments, or even drive them, though that would reduce their value a bit. There's no rush. Richard prepaid secure storage and maintenance for the next 5 years. In the following days, I reviewed all the papers Richard had left, gradually grasping the scope of his secret financial planning. Beyond the cars, he had built a portfolio of real estate and investments, all arranged to pass smoothly into my hands after his death. One document especially caught my attention: the deed to a small but beautiful house in Key West, Florida, a seaside town we had visited many times and always loved. According to the records, Richard had purchased it 4 years earlier, fully furnished and ready to live in. I had a house, a real home, not just the garage, no matter how valuable the treasures inside might be. When night fell, my phone lit up with David's name. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom, where are you?" His tone was more annoyed than concerned. "Aunt Ellen said you haven't contacted her." "I'm fine, David," I replied evenly. "I've found a place to stay." "Good. You need to come back and get the rest of your things from the penthouse. Tomorrow the decorators arrive. They need everything cleared out." Not a single word of apology, no mention of his cruelty, only more demands and dismissiveness. "I understand," I answered, a strange calm spreading through me. "When would be convenient for you?" "Tomorrow morning, before 9. I've got meetings all day." I glanced at the stack of documents before me, proof of Richard's care and deep love. I thought about the son who could throw his own mother out simply because he saw her as a burden, and I made a decision. I'll come. The next morning I arrived at the penthouse at 8:45, composed in my appearance. I wore a new outfit from the closet in the garage, a simple yet elegant navy suit that fit perfectly. David opened the door, phone in hand, barely looking at me. The apartment was already different, emptier, colder. Some of my decorations were gone, and the family photos in the hallway had disappeared. "Finally," he said, "I packed up most of your personal things. The decorators will be here at 9:30, so we have to be quick." No good morning, no asking where I'd slept after he had thrown me out. Only urgency for his plans. "Good morning to you too, David," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I see you've started redecorating." He shrugged and led me to the master bedroom, where boxes were stacked high. "No need to keep anything. The condo needs a full remodel to increase value." "Increase value," I echoed. "Are you planning to sell?" "Yes. It's too big for one person. The market's strong now. I'll renovate, stay a year, then sell for profit." His contempt for the place Richard and I had called home cut deeply, but I only nodded. "I see. As for Dad's things," David gestured vaguely at some boxes in the corner. "I kept the Rolex and his cufflink collection. The rest is just clothes, old stuff. Take what you want, the rest goes to charity." "Old stuff," I repeated, opening the first box. Inside were Richard's favorite books, his treasured vintage fountain pens, the sweater I gave him last Christmas, still carrying his scent. Each item was a piece of the man I loved, now dismissed by our son as worthless. I began carefully selecting, setting aside what I cherished, while David paced, checking his watch every minute. "Can't you hurry up? They're just things, Mom. You don't even have anywhere to keep them." I looked at him, really looked at the man my son had become. Sharp in appearance like his father, but without Richard's warmth and kindness in his eyes. "I do have somewhere," I said calmly. "And I'll take the time I need. These aren't just things, David, they're memories." He rolled his eyes in frustration. "Fine, I've got a call to make. Be done before 9:30. He left without a glance back. As I continued sorting, grief swept over me, not just for Richard, but for the son I thought I had raised. He had always been cold and dismissive. I had just chosen to ignore it, making excuses. Richard had seen it clearly, so clearly, that he crafted a complex plan to protect me from our own son. In the back of the closet, I found Richard's old leather backpack. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name and a note. "If you find this, Mary, it's a duplicate of all the documents in the garage safe, just in case." My husband, so clever and cautious, had even made copies of the backups. When the doorman helped me carry the boxes to the car, I looked at the building one last time. A mix of sadness and freedom rose in me. The penthouse had been filled with memories, but it had never truly belonged to me, not like the garage and everything Richard had prepared inside it. I drove out of Chicago, heading toward the Florida coast. It was time to see the home Richard had set aside for me, the inheritance he had truly intended. As the miles passed, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time since losing Richard, I wasn't just surviving grief, I was stepping toward a new beginning. The drive to Key West soothed something in my soul. The winding coastal road opened to endless blue ocean, and I found myself breathing deeper than I had in weeks. I followed the directions to a modest stone house, half hidden behind tall trees. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it was warm and private. The wooden gate led to a path that circled a carefully tended garden. Using the key from the documents, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. What I saw made me pause. Every detail had been chosen with me in mind. The living room held bookshelves around a stone fireplace, armchairs in the exact style I liked. Natural light streamed through wide windows, falling across wooden floors and hand-woven rugs. The kitchen was modern yet classic, with a breakfast nook overlooking the garden. The bedroom wasn't large but felt welcoming, opening onto a small patio with a glimpse of the sea. But it was the little study off the living room that brought me to tears. On the simple desk hung a watercolor of the canals of Venice, the very place Richard had proposed to me, painted by a street artist decades ago. The original had been lost in a move, but here was a perfect replica, as if Richard had commissioned it from memory for me. Tears spilled freely then, not the choking sobs of past weeks, but a gentle release. Richard had built this place for me with such care, filling it with comfort and joy. A soft knock startled me. Opening the door, I found an elegant woman in her 70s, holding a covered tray. "Hello," she said warmly. "You must be Mary. I'm Margaret Wilson, your neighbor. Richard asked me to look in on you when you arrived." I was stunned. "You knew Richard?" I asked. She nodded, handing me the tray. "He came here several times over the years to prepare the house. I was one of the few he trusted with the plan. He made me promise not to reach out until you officially arrived." Over hot tea in the kitchen, Margaret filled in the missing pieces. "Richard had been meticulous," she explained. "He had brought photos of our Chicago home, noting my style to recreate a place that would feel like mine here in Key West." I admitted I hadn't known any of this, that he had kept it completely secret. Margaret nodded knowingly. "He once told me it was to protect you, though he didn't share details. He said when you came, you might need a friend, someone who understood what it meant to rebuild a life after loss." In the days that followed, I settled into a gentle rhythm, getting to know the town, meeting neighbors, and each night returning to a house that felt more and more like home. On the fourth day, my phone lit up with David's number. I hesitated before answering. "Mom, where are you?" His voice was still edged with impatience. "Aunt Ellen said you're not with her." "I'm taking some time for myself, David," I replied. "I've found a place to stay." "What does that mean? Where? You can't just disappear like this." "I'm not telling you where I am. What do you need?" He paused. Then his tone shifted into the cold cadence of business. Actually, yes. I've been reviewing Dad's papers more closely and found traces of investments not mentioned in the will. There might be accounts or properties we don't know about. My heartbeat quickened, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of traces? Nothing concrete, just notes about meetings with financial advisors I'd never heard of. Vague lines about securing future assets. Clearly, David was suspicious, hunting for wealth he believed he was owed. How long before he discovered the truth? If there were other assets, Mr. Miller would have mentioned them, I said. Maybe, David muttered, unconvinced. When are you coming back to Chicago? We should talk in person. I'm not sure. I need more time away from there. I heard his frustration even over the phone. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just vanish without telling anyone. I'm perfectly fine, David. I'm not wandering and I'm not alone. I just need time to process. After hanging up, I sat in the garden, thinking. Richard's question from the letter echoed again. Would David prove himself worthy of sharing in this legacy? So far, his actions only confirmed Richard's fears about his character. But people can change, can't they? Somewhere, the son I once knew, warm, compassionate, still had to exist. 3 months later, I had grown into a more natural rhythm. I split my time between tending the house, exploring the community, and managing the responsibilities of Richard's estate. With attorney Patricia, Green's help, I set up systems to oversee the properties and investments. The cars remained safe in the garage, cared for by Charles Woods' team. I even drove the Aston Martin once, a nervous trip along the coast that nonetheless brought joy, making me feel closer to Richard. My relationship with David remained strained. We communicated mostly by email on necessary matters. As Patricia predicted, David's early legal attempts to contest the estate failed, with lawyers confirming Richard's arrangements were airtight. I was pruning roses when a strange car stopped outside. Out stepped a tall, professional-looking woman with an air of urgency. Mrs. Harris, I'm Claire Monroe, David's assistant. May I have a word? Her tension beneath her polished demeanor sent a ripple of unease through me. In the living room, Claire perched on the edge of her seat, declining the tea I offered. Mrs. Harris, I'm here because David is in serious trouble. He asked me to speak directly since he feared you wouldn't take his calls. What kind of trouble? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Mainly financial. She opened a thin folder. The penthouse renovation costs have doubled the budget. Structural issues require far more money. At the same time, David's primary investment collapsed. He put funds into a construction project that ran into permit problems. He's now deeply in the red and nearly out of cash. I wasn't surprised. Richard had once mentioned the building's aging infrastructure, but his maintenance proposals had been ignored. Claire continued. Frankly, David needs financial help. He knows you have the means to prevent bankruptcy and save the penthouse. Just as I had expected 3 months ago. No apology, no attempt at reconciliation, just a plea for money delivered through someone else so he wouldn't have to ask himself. Has David considered selling the penthouse? I asked. Even mid-renovation it might cover the debts. He has considered it, Claire admitted, but selling now would mean heavy losses. Plus, there are disputes with the contractors. In other words, David had likely clashed with the builders either because of his temperament or unpaid bills. Thank you for explaining, I said after a pause. Please tell David I've heard and will think about it. Claire looked startled at my non-committal answer. Mrs. Harris, this is urgent. Foreclosure proceedings could start within weeks. I understand, and I need time to consider. That's all I can say today. The next morning, instead of calling David, I drove into the city to see the penthouse myself. The doorman, who had known me for years, let me up without question. What I found was alarming. The once luxurious home was gutted, wires and pipes exposed, a hazardous maze. The project had been abandoned, a fine layer of dust showing no one had worked there in weeks. Walking through what had once been my home, I was overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Grief at the memories destroyed, anger at the waste and mismanagement, and gratitude that Richard had safeguarded me from all of this. I was examining water damage when I heard the door open. "Mom," David's voice echoed in the hollow space. "The doorman said you were here." He appeared in the doorway, and he looked entirely different. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face drawn and haggard from sleepless nights. He was thinner, his features resembling Richard's in his most difficult days. "I wanted to see for myself," I said, pointing at the wreckage around us. David ran a hand through his hair, that old habit from childhood whenever he was frustrated. "I guess Claire told you." I nodded. "She explained your financial situation, and I need to understand everything before I decide." I stepped carefully over the scattered materials. "This is far from what you described when you started the renovation." He gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, in construction or in life, things rarely go as planned." "David," I said gently, "what happened with the investment project?" My tone must have lowered his guard. He sat down on an overturned trash bin, looking exhausted. I took on more than I could handle. It seemed like a sure thing. Luxury condos in a promising area, good pre-sales. I put in all the money I had, borrowed more, even leveraged the future value of the penthouse. Then the environmental review found undisclosed contamination. Cleanup costs sank the project. The investors all pulled out. I looked around at the ruin, the gutted apartment, and David's financial collapse alike. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, before it got this far?" His face hardened. "After our last talk, after I found out about what Dad did and your role in it, I thought maybe it was pride or stubbornness, Harris traits, strong in both of us." I nodded. "Yes, both very strong. So, have you decided to help me?" he asked, trying to sound calm. I met his eyes. "I'm willing to help, David, but not unconditionally, and not by simply writing a check." A flicker of relief mixed with weariness crossed his face. "What conditions?" "We need to have a serious conversation," I said, heading toward the door. "Not here, surrounded by evidence of rash decisions. Come to Key West tomorrow. We'll talk about how to move forward. Not just patching the immediate problem, but addressing the root cause." He looked as if he wanted to argue, push me into deciding right there. But in the end, his need outweighed his pride. "Fine, tomorrow." David arrived the next morning at 11 a.m., on the dot, looking sharper, trying to project control I knew he no longer had. I had prepared carefully, not just in my mind, but by setting the space for our conversation. "It's beautiful," he remarked awkwardly as I led him to the back patio, where I had set out comfortable, chairs and a light lunch. "Dad chose well." "He did," I said. "He remembered how much I loved the ocean." David's expression shifted briefly at the mention of Richard, but he sat in silence. The patio overlooked a small, well-tended garden, sloping toward glimpses of the turquoise sea between neighboring houses. The air was quiet, private, balanced the right setting for the difficult talk ahead. After pouring iced tea for both of us, I turned to face him. "Before we talk about your finances, I want you to see this." I handed him a leather folder I had prepared that morning, filled with selected documents from Richard's files. "These are financial forecasts and maintenance reports for the penthouse," I explained as he leafed through them. "Your father commissioned them 3 years ago, anticipating major failures in the building's systems. The calculations match exactly what you're dealing with in this renovation." David frowned. "He never mentioned it." "He tried," I corrected softly. "Several times, but you brushed it off as needless worry, unnecessary costs. He even showed you this report during our last Christmas together, just before his diagnosis." A flicker of recognition crossed David's face, remembering the tedious building assessment his father had brought up at dinner. I sipped my tea. Richard wasn't just careful. He wanted to prepare you for exactly this situation. David set the folder aside, his jaw tight. "If you brought me here just to say Dad told you so, then—" "No," I interrupted. "I'm giving you context for my decision about helping you. Richard foresaw this, not just the building's issues, but the pattern of decision-making that brought you to this crisis." "What pattern?" His tone was defensive, but underneath I heard real doubt. "Favoring appearances over substance," I said, "chasing quick returns instead of sustainable growth, ignoring caution as though it were meaningless pessimism." I held his gaze. "Those same traits led you to throw me out of my home instead of considering what I needed alongside your plans." His eyes dropped, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "I shouldn't have done that." "No, you shouldn't." A silence fell, filled only by distant waves and seabirds. David shifted uneasily, unaccustomed to my directness. For most of his adult life, I had been the peacemaker, the one bending around his moods. "So, what are you proposing? What conditions for your help?" he asked. "First, total transparency," I said. "I need to see everything: accounts, debts, contracts, commitments. Nothing hidden, nothing omitted." He gave a stiff nod. "Fine. And more. Professional financial management from now on. You've shown that your decisions are swayed by impulse and overconfidence. Any money I provide will go through a fund with independent oversight." His face darkened. "So I'll be treated like a child, some financial failure under guardianship." "This isn't punishment, David," I corrected. "It's protection for you and for the money itself." "And you'll control the fund?" "No," I said, surprising him. "An independent manager, legally accountable. I don't care to control your life, only to ensure this help truly builds something lasting." He went still, torn between the desire for help and fear of losing freedom. "The penthouse is still mine. The most reasonable solution is to sell it," I said, watching him carefully. "Even in its current state, it could cover most of your debts. You could start fresh, somewhere easier to manage." "Sell it?" The thought shocked him. "But it's the family home, where you and Dad—" "It's just a place, David," I interrupted gently. "A place you were eager to tear apart only months ago. Memories don't live in the walls." He sprang up, pacing across the small patio. I don't understand. Selling means admitting I've failed completely. Everyone will know." And there it was, his fear wasn't about attachment, but about appearances, about what others would think. "Everyone already knows," I said evenly. "The work's been stalled for months. Contractors are suing. The finance world is buzzing." He stopped short, shoulders sagging. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" The raw vulnerability in his voice startled me. "Not everything," I said gently, "but you've created serious problems. Fixing them will require real change." David sank into a chair, drained. "So what are you actually offering me?" "A structured path," I replied. I'll create a fund to handle urgent debts, to stave off bankruptcy. We'll hire experts to complete only essential renovations, then sell the penthouse or prepare for sale immediately, depending on the evaluation. In return, you accept financial oversight for a set period. You'll work with a therapist to confront what brought you here. I paused, then added firmly, and you'll make amends for how you treated me after your father's death. Our eyes met. What does making amends mean? It means acknowledging the hurt you caused. It means recognizing that relationships carry consequences, just as financial choices do. I leaned in slightly. I'm helping you not as a transaction, but because I believe you can be better than your recent actions show. My words seemed to crack the shell he'd held for so long. He looked away, blinking quickly. I didn't mean it that day, when I said you were useless, he murmured. I was angry, I lashed out. Maybe so, I nodded. But those words didn't come from nowhere. They reflected an attitude you've carried toward me, toward older women. You need to face that. He didn't argue, and even that was progress. I need time to think, he said at last. Take it, I replied. But remember, your creditors won't wait. Spring returned to Key West, my garden bright against the deep blue sea. 9 months had passed since Richard's death, 6 since I had discovered the garage, and 4 since David's crisis forced us to finally speak honestly. After 3 days of silence, David called back with an answer that surprised me. I'll do it, whatever it takes. The road from that acceptance was anything but easy. Financial restructuring took weeks of work with accountants and lawyers, revealing an even deeper mess than David had admitted. The penthouse required hard decisions, ultimately resolved. Finish only the essentials, then sell quickly to pay off debts. Harder still was the personal work David had agreed to. Weekly therapy sessions, at first filled with skepticism, gradually became a source of genuine insight. Our relationship entered a new phase, not perfect, but more honest than it had been in years. One afternoon, I was tending roses when a familiar car pulled up. David stepped out, carrying a small package, looking entirely different from the desperate man once teetering on the edge of ruin. Still well-dressed, but simpler, more relaxed. He wore a short beard, giving his face a resemblance to Richard in his younger days. "The garden looks wonderful," he said warmly, kissing my cheek, a gesture full of sincerity. "You've made this place truly beautiful." "I only carried on what your father started," I answered, setting down my tools. We sat down, continuing our monthly meeting, this time without the old tension. "The penthouse sale will close next week," he said. "The final inspection went well. We'll net about 40% more than if we dumped it in a fire sale." "That's wonderful news," I replied. "It'll give the fund more room for your next step." David carefully set his teacup down. "I want to tell you something. I've been offered a position with a community development organization focusing on affordable housing." I was surprised. David's career had always revolved around high-end real estate, often dismissing modest housing. "Of course, the salary is much lower," he continued, "but the fund you set up covers my basic needs. And," he hesitated, "this work matters. I'm using my knowledge for more than just making money." "What motivates you?" I asked. He looked out toward the ocean. "Remember that failed project? The luxury condos. That site is now being redeveloped by a nonprofit into mixed-income housing, beautifully designed, environmentally friendly. I've been helping them for a while, unofficially. I'm good with the technical aspects without the pressure of maximizing profit." He shrugged, embarrassed yet proud. I studied his face, seeing for the first time a genuine light when he spoke about his work. "It seems you've found something more meaningful than just business success." He smiled softly. "Dad would probably think it ironic me working in affordable housing after all those years chasing the luxury market." "No," I corrected gently. "He always valued using talent for a worthwhile purpose." David nodded. Then he handed me a small package. "Speaking of Dad, that's partly why I brought this. While cleaning out the penthouse, we found a few things he thought I should keep." Inside the parcel was a small wooden box. I recognized immediately Richard's collection of cufflinks and tie clips, the items David had taken at first. "I kept them because I thought they tied me to Dad," David explained as he opened the box. "But lately I've realized they're just objects. The real connection to him isn't in these." Beneath the cufflinks was a small velvet pouch holding my original wedding band, the one I thought lost in the chaos of the penthouse. "I found it in Dad's office safe," David said as I lifted the simple gold ring from the pouch. Along with it, he gave me a small envelope bearing my name in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was an anniversary card for our 45th year. The first ring was a promise of the life we would build together. This one celebrates the life we created. "All my love, forever." Tucked inside the card was a receipt from a jeweler for an eternity ring dated just weeks before Richard's final hospitalization, a gift he never lived to give me. "He was planning even then," I whispered, tears clouding my vision, "always thinking ahead." "The jeweler still had the order," David said. "I picked it up for you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a delicate sapphire and diamond eternity band. Simple, elegant, perfectly my style. The stones caught the spring light, scattering tiny prisms across the table. "Oh, Richard," I murmured as I slipped it on beside my original wedding band. They looked perfect together, the plain gold of our beginning and the jeweled circle of the journey we had lived. David watched silently, giving me space for that moment of connection with his father. When I finally looked back at him, I saw something I hadn't in years, a softness, a patient respect. Before leaving, David paused at the garden gate. "If anyone asks, 'What did you do with the cars in Dad's garage?'" I smiled, recalling my recent conversation with Charles. "I'll keep the Aston Martin." Richard would have loved knowing I sometimes drive it along the coast. "The other two will be sold. The money split between a financial literacy foundation and a fund for your children, if you ever have any." David repeated quietly, thoughtful. "If I have any, that sounds optimistic." "Your father was always an optimist," I replied. Beneath his practical plans was a belief that people can grow, can become better versions of themselves if given the right chance. That night, I drove the Aston Martin along. The coastal road, the powerful engine roaring as I took curves, Richard had never seen me navigate. The sunset turned the sea into liquid gold, while my hands, wearing the simple gold ring and the jeweled eternity band, held the wheel steady. "You were right," I said softly to Richard's memory. "You were right about so much." The garage, once dismissed as worthless, once a symbol of my son's contempt for my value, had ended up transforming not only my life but also our relationship. The inheritance that had seemed so unfair was, in truth, Richard's final act of wisdom and love for us both. Looking back on the journey, I realized the most precious legacy Richard left wasn't the cars or the seaside home, but the lesson of how one can love and protect family, even in absence. True legacy isn't in walls or numbers on paper, but in trust, compassion, and the way we treat each other. Sometimes it takes loss to see the truth of family ties. Some cling to selfishness, others learn to grow and change. For me, this journey was not only about reclaiming my worth, but also proof that love and patience can create space for healing and renewal. And what about you? Faced with the choice between wealth, prestige, and the peace of family, what would you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you'd like to walk alongside more journeys filled with lessons and emotion, stay tuned so you won't miss what's coming next. Together, we'll keep learning to cherish, to forgive, and to find strength in challenges that once seemed impossible.